She helps managers, execs, and technical leaders build healthy and high-performing teams. I mean, honestly, talk about a girl boss, because she's doing that on top of being a mom. And has brought her adorable baby girl with her today. Laura is joining us all the way from Austria with a background in infrastructure and distributed systems. So please give her a warm ShipItCon welcome for Laura Tacho, a boss within our midst.
All right, I gotta stay here. All right. Thank you all. It's my first time in Dublin, and I'm actually very impressed. You've all been so nice and kind. I live in Austria, which is not known for its hospitality, we'll put it that way. So it's been a nice change of pace. For the next 30 minutes, I want to spend some time going into this question: what's slowing down your team? And I'm not an astronaut, unfortunately. I wish I were. But I do have a lot of experience working with engineering teams. I'm going to tell you a story about a leader or someone on a team, and this is something I hear all the time from technical leaders. I don't care how my team is feeling, I want to know what the data says. So if you listen to that, it might sound a little bit cold, it might sound a bit misguided, but this isn't just a quote from some random person that I've worked with. This is actually something that I've said numerous times. On the topic of unknowns, what we're hoping for when we look into metrics like DORA metrics, the space framework of developer productivity, is we're hoping that we can find some kind of framework that's going to shine a light and reveal the secret truth, and it's going to show us this unknown about why our team can't be achieving more. I mentioned DORA. We have the space framework. There's a new framework called the DevX Dimensions that has 3 dimensions of productivity or of developer experience, which I'll talk about throughout this talk. You might also on your own teams have your own measurements of team performance and team productivity. These are really important metrics frameworks, but we have to understand their limitations, and especially if we are trusting them to uncover unknown unknowns, unfortunately, we're going to be misguided. We need to use these metrics frameworks responsibly. What I think these metrics frameworks are best for is actually helping you see the known knowns that you have on your team. And I call them known knowns because you've probably heard about these problems before, that you're searching for answers with these metrics frameworks, but you don't trust the data. Not quite yet. And that's what leads us to say, oh, well, I don't care how my team is feeling, I just want to know what the data says. All data is data. Just think about what that means. All data is data, not just data coming from GitHub or coming from Jira. All data is data. People's opinions are data. That is also data. Metrics are absolutely important. And I spend 95% of my time working with engineering leaders talking about why metrics are important and how to use them. But they do absolutely have limitations that are very important for you to understand. Metrics will not tell you where your problems are and tell you what you should do about them, unfortunately. Okay, if they could do that, I would have come up with a framework, and I wouldn't be standing on stage here. I would be in some chalet, I don't know where, sipping sparkling water, doing whatever it is that what I would do if I didn't have to work, because I would be so rich. I would just be like Donald Duck or Scrooge McDuck diving into piles of money all day long. The reason that there is not a metrics framework that is going to be easily implemented by your team and then show you where the problems are and help you fix them is that because such a thing just simply does not exist. And so if someone is promising you, well, if we just start using these metrics, then we can get to the bottom of our productivity issues, they're lying to you or they're trying to sell you something, unfortunately. Metrics can't do that for you. They can do a lot of things for you, and they can do a lot of important things for you and your team. They can benchmark your team against the industry, or benchmark yourself against yourself so you can see the progress that you've made. You can make goals and then see how things are unfolding. The other thing that metrics do very well is to quantify sentiments expressed by your team members. And what I mean by this is that everyone in this room has a very different lived experience in life, but also as part of a development team. And what is slow for you might not be slow for me. Or what are too many flaky tests for me might not be too many flaky tests for you. And when we look only in the absolute numbers of, okay, well, this test suite has 3 flaky tests and we hit them a couple times a week, that doesn't tell me if my team thinks it's a problem or if it's the most important thing that I should focus on. What we can do is correlate those workflow metrics to perception metrics and then try to figure out where we go from there. So that's a really powerful thing that these metrics can do for you. I have worked in the last year and a half with over 250 teams who are looking to introduce metrics or improve the metrics that they use to measure development productivity and development team performance. I have looked at dashboards, literally thousands and thousands of metrics of teams who are trying to figure out, where is that unknown? Where can we increase our productivity, increase our performance? Why are we going so slow? It feels like we should be able to go fast. And what I keep coming upon in all of these hundreds of teams, thousands of metrics, is that almost every team suffers from the same handful of problems. It's like 5 problems max. These problems typically show their face in 3 ways: projects, process, and people. So there is no silver bullet. There is no magical metrics framework that is going to secretly, lift the cover on some unknown and help you move faster. But I am going to give you a bit of a shortcut, because through those hundreds of teams, I've come across these same problems. What I'm going to do is help you learn about these common issues. I'll tell you about them. I'm going to tell you some ways that you can measure them. And then also at the end, I'll show you some ways that you can educate yourself so you can keep the conversation going with your team. What you need to do, though, because I'm not going to do the work for you, you need to start a conversation with your team about these metrics if you're interested in using them. I would recommend setting goals around process changes, project changes, 1 or 2 at a time if you do decide to start using metrics to improve your development habits and improve processes. If you start to do things and say, okay, well, we got to fix these 7 things, you're not going to get anything done. 7 is just too many, and even sometimes 2 is too many. 1 is great, 2 is probably okay, 3 tends to be too many. You have to focus your effort. And then it is still up to you to do the hard work. Implementing metrics is hard work as well, but again, it's not going to tell you what you need to change. It's just going to give you a measurement, and it's up to you to figure out what you need to do in order to move that lever up or down, depending on what result you want. All right, so you still got to do the hard work. I'm not a big fan of clickbaity anything, so I'm actually just going to start with the biggest problem that most teams have. I'm just going to kind of do everything. Right now, it's too much work in progress. Out of the hundreds of teams that I have worked with, both consulting on metrics, or if I'm working with their leader in a very, very in-depth coaching environment or coaching engagement, the biggest problem I see across all teams, startup, enterprise, regardless of what industry, if teams are having problems getting stuff done, it is because they have too much work in progress. In the immortal words of Ron Swanson, never half-ass 2 things, whole-ass 1 thing. Sometimes this is really difficult, right? Because engineering, we're often on the receiving end of a lot of, there's just a lot of stuff flying at us. And so we might not be able to choose where our asses go, right? But as much as you can, if you can consolidate your asses into 1 whole ass instead of half-assing many things, we're better off for it. Again, this is not about saying no. We'll get to that later. This is just simply about, instead of trying to get 10 things done simultaneously, just finish 1 thing and then move on to the next thing. Ways that you can measure this, the most obvious one is looking at the number of concurrent projects that your team has. That is a very obvious one. I think that's where most people go first when I say too much work in progress. The best metric that I have to measure this, and what I would suggest that you do, is the number of projects per engineer. I find that to be the actual thing that we want to get to the bottom of, is that for an individual person, how much cognitive load are they carrying through their work week or through their sprint? Are they able to focus on a project until it's done, or are they having to juggle 5 different things? So I always look at the number of projects per engineer. Project has a big star next to it. No one has agreed on what a project is. So if you're responsible for maintaining a particular component, maybe you call that a project. If you're working on an epic, maybe you call that a project. You still need to define these terms for what makes sense for your team. But how much cognitive load are your engineers carrying around, because you just have a lot of stuff? Those 2 top metrics, number of current projects and number of projects per engineer, are what we would call objective metrics. They are numbers. They go up or they go down. There's really not any room for personal opinion in there. But when we talk about developer experience, it is about the experience of our developers, and that's all about perception and satisfaction and a lot of the human aspects that we tend to overlook. Again, thinking back, I don't care how my engineers are feeling, I want to know what the data says. But feeling overwhelmed and feeling like you have too much going on is a feeling, and that's important. Perception that the team is spread too thin, or perception that there's too many projects going on at once, these are questions I would include on a developer experience survey. And in fact, what you can do here is, we're going to start putting these pieces together. Let's say your team says, yes, I do think there's too much going on. I am responsible for too many projects at once. Then we can look at that measurement. How many projects is too many projects? Because everyone has a different threshold. Some people might love being responsible for 5 things. Some people might totally crack at 2. So we need to kind of have these metrics play on one another. Too much work in progress is often a result or a symptom of lack of prioritization. We don't like to say no. Sometimes we can't say no. I love to say no. No means not now, right? Yes is yes forever. It's like, yes, I'll build that thing, and then I'm committing to, who knows how much maintenance and all the other changes and everything. Again, I know that you can't control this all the time, but certainly if you can look at your scope of influence and figure out how might we prioritize better. Now that you hear me on stage talking about prioritization, does it strike a chord in your brain and say, oh, actually, I think that we could do better? Because oftentimes we just don't think about it. We think about, well, this is just how things are, and we don't feel agency to change it. So I might measure things like interruptions or delays to projects. I might look at satisfaction with OKRs and KPIs. Oftentimes, if there's no prioritization, the work that your engineers are doing on a day-to-day basis, it doesn't actually line up to your OKR or KPI or whatever goal that you have. Those OKRs and KPIs, they start this lack of prioritization all the way at the top company level. I've worked with companies that have an OKR like, we're gonna acquire 25 new customers. Has anyone had an OKR like that, or a goal like, oh, customer acquisition, that's our top priority? But then we don't talk about, well, does that mean enterprise customers, or does that mean self-service customers? Because when your team gets a request for build out this RBAC in our API, or improve the self-service portal, what do you say no to? Your OKRs and the goals that you set for your team should tell your team what they should not focus on, rather than what they should focus on. I think that's the best way to build in some filter to avoid this prioritization trap where everything becomes a priority. If your goals for your company and your team don't help your team say, I will not work on that because that is not important, then the goal is not specific enough. Oftentimes we can take the temperature of the team in a developer experience survey and ask if their projects line up to OKRs, or ask about their experience, because they go through it every day. They're making those decisions every day. They can tell you about it. Similarly, focusing on the most important thing, or even ability to define most important thing. I've worked on teams, I've been an engineer myself on a team where I couldn't answer that question. I didn't know what the most important thing was because it seemed to be changing weekly, daily sometimes. So those on the project front. On the process front, we start to see the ways that our teams work with their surrounding environment can actually get in our way quite a bit. One of the biggest issues that I see on teams who are trying to move faster, the thing that stands in their way is slow feedback. And this is feedback from people, but also feedback from machines. So I mentioned the 3 pillars of DevX. This is a new study that came out, or a new paper within the last few months. Feedback is one of the pillars, cognitive load, and then focus time. So we're going to hit on the feedback piece. It is really hard to optimize something when you're not getting feedback from your system on whether or not the choice that you made or whatever you did was the right thing or the wrong thing. And so on the people side of this, I see teams get their first feedback from stakeholders like marketing, sales, even their PMs during a demo when they've already built something. That, quite honestly, just stinks for everybody because the engineers have invested so much time doing the wrong thing, and then the stakeholders think, well, can I even trust this team to deliver what we need to deliver for the business? It just doesn't work. But oftentimes we don't build in early feedback into our processes. So by introducing earlier feedback, your teams can get feedback on whether or not what they're doing is the right thing, and they can optimize their systems better. The goal here is to complete work with minimal friction. So whether that's getting feedback from stakeholders or on the CI/CD build side of things. Quite honestly, the infrastructure side of things, CI/CD, if you have problems here that are easily solved, I bet you've solved them already. And if you have problems that are not easily solved, I bet that they've been deprioritized because you need to build a new shiny thing. So what metrics frameworks can do is help give you a little bit more argument or a bit of a stronger platform to stand on. So we know that slow feedback actually deteriorates from the developer experience, and bad CI/CD is part of that. So this could help you potentially put together a better argument for prioritizing some of those bigger technical debt investment projects or technical projects over new shiny thing. I look at time to first stakeholder review as something to see if there's enough feedback in the system. And then, of course, we want to hit on those perceptive metrics, perception of feedback quality and frequency. So we've talked about slow feedback, cognitive load, flow state, and enough focus time is another one of those pillars of developer experience. You all probably have had weeks or days or years of your career where you think, man, I go to work every day, I sit at my computer, I'm doing stuff, and at the end of the day, you just think, I got nothing done. Like, what did I do all day? And a lot of that is because you just don't get enough focus time to actually complete something. And with focus time, we can see how these problems start to compound on one another, right? We have too much work in progress because we can't prioritize. We're not getting great feedback from stakeholders, and this is just leading to feeling like you're on a children's TV program where like every 3 minutes you've got to be jumping to do a different project, and then this is on fire, and the pager's going off, and all of these things. There's another meeting to go into. How you get more focus time is, again, not an easy code to crack, and quite honestly, if I had a solution to tell you, I would just tell you how to do it. Some of the things that I look at to see, where could we improve focus time or how could we get better at it would be number of meetings per week per planning cycle. If you're on a sprint cycle, we've got sprint planning, retro, demos, backlog grooming, all these things. Take them all away and then see who complains. That's been my strategy. It's worked generally. I typically find like whenever we get to a breaking point of I feel like we have too many meetings, you probably need a quarter of the meetings to be effective as a team. Not all meetings are bad. Boring meetings are bad. I absolutely hate boring meetings. Boring meetings can be an email. There's nothing at stake whatsoever in a boring meeting. If it's just a status readout or you're just going through Jira talking about what's already on the Jira board, record a video, put it in Slack. Leave people alone, let them do their stuff. Some people use a tool called Clockwise, if you've heard of it, to look at how much focus time or how many meetings are in a week. And also you can use Clockwise to deliberately schedule chunks of focus time. That's worked quite well for teams that I've worked with. And of course, the perceptive metric here Do you feel that you get enough focus time? For some people, getting a whole day of meeting-free time might be plenty. For some people, they're really expecting, I want every afternoon without meetings so that I can get deep into my work. It's all a matter of perception, so ask your team what they think, and they can tell you what the problem is or what the problem isn't. Here's a brief reminder. Software is built by people, teams made of people. The problems that we just talked about are caused by people and probably caused by you. There should have been an emoji there, but it's hard. So this is not to come down and say, oh yeah, well you're all doing your job wrong. That's not what this is, right? But I think that when we're in search of metrics and we're in search of something that's gonna help our team move faster, we often forget that the reason that things are the way they are is because people designed the processes to work that way. And if maybe they evolved over time, granted, and you can't control everything, but if they got that way because of people, then probably we can fix them with people. When I look at management style, leadership style across teams who are trying to improve their performance, absolutely the number one thing that goes wrong is unclear expectations. If you are giving an expectation, you avoid giving too much detail because you are afraid of being a micromanager. I'm afraid of being a micromanager as well. Giving enough information is not micromanagement. We have, I think as an industry, especially in engineering, where there's already a lot of anti-manager sentiment, we have a lot of misconceptions about what it means actually to be a micromanager. Giving your team enough information so they can do their job right the first time is not micromanagement. And if you're receiving expectations and it's unclear and you don't ask a question, there might be very valid reasons why. You don't want to seem incompetent. It might be a psychologically unsafe team. But this is on both sides, the unclear expectations. We fall into this trap. It's what I call the micromanagement spiral. It's just like, you start circling the drain and your team can't quite get out of it until the cycle breaks. And so this is for people who are managers, but also project leaders, stakeholders. So if you're responsible for results, this is generally what happens. You set an open-ended expectation because you want to avoid micromanagement. No one likes to be a micromanager. What happens then is because the team doesn't actually have the information that they need to get it done correctly the first time, the team misses the expectation that you had or that your stakeholders had. Because how should they hit it? Then what happens is that you have to go in the details and course correct. And at that point, you are a micromanager. It's exactly the thing that you wanted to avoid. That feels crappy both for your team and for you. And so you go back to your default way of working, of setting vague expectations, and the cycle just repeats itself and repeats itself. It's so difficult to correct any of those other problems about projects, too much work in process, lack of prioritization, any of those things, if the fundamental way that your team operates is highly inefficient. And this cycle here wastes an incredible amount of time, all because we're a bit afraid of being a micromanager and we don't want to be too prescriptive. How can you figure out if your team has unclear expectations? This is a hard one. This isn't as neat and tidy as, too much work in progress. One thing that I look at is if you have a PR that's open, let's say, or a ticket that's been moved to in review, you can see if they need to be kicked back and rework or how long they spend at that point in the process. In my ideal method of operating on a team, granted, this is not for a draft PR, those can be a different thing, but PRs are open, and that's basically like a formality, right? At that point, everything should have been discussed. Demos have been had, a lot of the things have already been hashed out. If PRs are opened or tickets are going into in review and there's this whole tornado of discussion because oh, should it do this? You missed this edge case. What about this? Why don't you test this? That means that something's wrong earlier in the process, and now as the time goes on, the mistakes just get more expensive and more expensive. Ask about goals for your team. Ask about if they feel that they're getting enough information or if they're constantly feeling like they're doing the wrong thing. Because that also leads to burnout, which is not great for your team as well. Developer experience encompasses so many things from CI/CD to burnout, and so we want to make sure we're really taking care of our team as a whole. All right, so there's some shortcuts. Again, that's like a year and a half of working with a ton of teams boiled down into a couple slides with the most common problems. Where to go from here? If all of these things that have been up here, you think, wow, my team, that sounds like you're describing my team. You have to start a conversation with your team. The place that I would start is not by looking at GitHub metrics or Jira metrics. In fact, I would recommend putting that off as long as you possibly can, because they're not very useful without the developer experience part of the conversation. So I would start with perception. Most of the time, this looks like a DevX survey. And most teams that I work with, the very first thing that they do as part of our engagement is that they put out a DevX survey, and then when the results come back, they're like, whoa, this is either this is exactly what I was expecting, and now I have something that I can show my upper management, or they're like, wow, I didn't know that my team felt this way. It doesn't have to be a survey. If you have retros, one-on-ones, you can take that as data as well. Again, all data is data. One interesting thing that some of my leaders have done are just take one-question polls during team meetings. How has CI/CD stability been for you this week? 1 out of 10. It's really easy. You have a captive audience. That's a good place to start. I have put together a very big question bank of questions and a methodology for putting together your own developer experience survey. I have it here, dev survey questions. So feel free to take a picture, look it up. Beg, borrow, steal, change whatever you want to fit your needs. I have a blog post that goes along with it that explains my methodology and the way that I think about it. Who brought a baby to a conference? My goodness. That's my baby. She's heard me rattle on about all this stuff for like the entire 9 months, and then for the 3 months that she's been on this planet. So she's got a year of experience. Good. Thanks. We should applaud parents and also non-parents. I mean, life is just hard, I think, in general. Great, so use that survey, beg, borrow, steal, change it to fit your needs. I also, if you use it and you find something astonishing, email me and tell me about it. I love to hear about, I've gotten lots of emails from teams who have used it, who said, oh wow, I used it and I discovered this thing and then we changed it and 3 weeks later it was so much better, thank you. I'm not saying that those results are guaranteed, but they could happen. Once you have that data, then you can start to use those metrics from GitHub, from Jira, from Jenkins or whatever, from Circle CI, to correlate and to quantify sentiments, to track progress, to set benchmarks, and then you can really see the progress that you've been making. Of course, the other thing, educate yourself and your team. Further reading, just a few things I would recommend. If this is all brand new to you, this idea of using metrics to talk about capability, to talk about performance, kind of the OG book on this, maybe it's like recent memory OG because there's lots of older books about it, but Accelerate by Dr. Nicole Forsgren, Gene Kim, and Jez Humble. This introduces DORA metrics and talks about them in a really thorough way. DORA metrics are a measure of capability of your DevOps systems. It's not a measurement of performance of your team. So just keep that in the back of your mind. DORA metrics can't tell you if your team is performing well. It tells you about capability. The 2 more recent papers, and in fact it's generally the same authors that went from DORA, then they worked on the space of developer productivity. It's about a 10-page read. It's pretty easy to go through. There's lots of diagrams and stuff. These are all on ACMQ, or if you just Google it, you can find the papers pretty easily. DevX, what actually drives productivity. This is brand new. This is from the same author team with a few extras as space. Cognitive load, focus time, and feedback. Those are the 3 pillars of optimal developer experience, and this paper goes into detail about what that looks like, what great looks like, so that you can start to figure out where's some room for improvement. Great. I have been working on this problem of what's slowing your team down, how can we move faster for a year and a half. I've looked at hundreds of teams, thousands of metrics. I will be here all day. I'm the one with the crying baby, so it shouldn't be hard to find me. But I'd love to hear about what your teams are struggling with. If you have questions for me about how to use things, best practices, I'd be very happy to talk about it. So come find me. And thanks for listening and investing this time today in your teams. Your teams are definitely better off for it. Thank you.
I always love seeing an expert turned coach who's happy to share information as well as inspire us into becoming better leaders as well as making